Karnak Temple is the biggest religious building in the whole world, not just in Egypt. It's built over almost 200 acres of land, over 2,000 years of time. The pharaohs of Egypt came here one after another to build us great constructions there, ending up by the first pylon built by King Necta Nebo. So, when you come to visit Egypt, and when you enter Luxor Temple and Karnak temples, you're going to compare between all the monuments of the world and the monuments especially here in Luxor, because it's a very specific city, it's a very nice city to be visited. The colonnade of Karnak Temple is the biggest in the world and the greatest building ever constructed for a religious purpose. It's 52 meters in length and 103 meters wide, which means that if compared to other relative buildings, it's 7,000 square feet less than Westminster Cathedral and 10,000 square feet smaller than the Notre Dame of Paris. The colonnade is associated with massive, astonishingly miraculous numbers in the world of constructions, for it comprises 134 giant sandstone columns divided into two sections. The first one is in the middle, where two main rows of papyrus columns, 22.4 meters high, bear apexes, which by turn bear the massive blocks of the ceiling. The diameter of each reaches 3 meters and a half, and its perimeter is more than 10 meters. The height of just the capital is 3.5 meters, and its diameter at the top is 5.5 meters. These two rows were constructed by King Amun-Hotep III, who had built the third pylon of the temple at the rear of the colonnade. King Seti I constructed the rest of the columns in the colonnade. That's not a statement to be taken lightly when we know that they are 122 in number. They are built in 14 rows, 7 on each side of the hall. The height of each column is 14.74 meters, with a diameter of 8 meters, matching the 8 meters difference in height between the side columns and the two rows in the middle. This gap was occupied by windows made of stone, in a highly elegant shape. The openings were designed accurately to allow beams of light to penetrate through it and enlighten the procession of the sacred bark of god Amun, the sun god, which used to pass through the middle of the colonnade on its way out to the port of the temple. The apex of each column weighs between 60 and 70 tons. One would wonder how the Egyptians built such giant structures. Such a question gave way for strange comic assumptions of an alien's interference. But the simple truth is, it was the geniusity of the ancient Egyptian engineers and the strong will of the builders. After building the base of the columns, walls of scaffoldings of mud bricks were built around them, wide enough to act as bridges for pulling the stones up. The higher the columns got, the higher the scaffoldings went, until the constructions were finished. Legrand followed the same way in the same location in October 1899 to erect 11 fallen columns and restoring the ones which were about to fall down. King Seti first called the colonnade the Temple of Seti, the one beloved of Ptah, the helpful in god Amun. It seems that the reliefs of the hall weren't finished during the time of Seti I and were completed by his son and successor, King Ramesses II. The reliefs in the northern half belong to King Seti, and the southern half bear reliefs of Ramesses II, who's represented releasing incense in front of Amun's bark, which is lifted up on the shoulders of priests wearing the masks of the spirits of Butu and Nechen, the falcons and the jackals. He has also recorded his name on the northern and southern entrances of the colonnade. As for Seti I, he performs his religious rituals, kneeling under the sacred tree of the millions of years of Heliopolis, while god Thoth writes his name on its leaves. The colonnade was totally colored, basically in the three main colors of red, orange and blue over a white background. Some of these colors remained to keep impressing the visitors of Karnak and imprint a fabulous eternal vision in their minds about the glory and the greatness of the ancient Egyptian progressed minds and architecture. The outer walls of the colonnade is a historical record of the victorious battles of King Seti I and his son Ramesses II in a series of giant reliefs. According to the chronological order, the ones of Seti I were carved first. They start with the king in Palestine establishing his power, while Palestinians flee to Bikanana fortress to hide in it. Then he is in Lebanon, where the natives cut trees for him. Then the scenes continues toward the western wall, where there are important scenes of his battles against the Asians in front of Yanam fortress, surrounded by water at the back. He marches behind his war chariot, dragging 2 rows of captives with their 4 leaders, at the presence of Amun, Mut, and Khonsu. An important scene shows him coming back from Palestine, fighting the Bedouins, and standing in his chariot, followed by the captives of his previous battles, and marching forward towards a channel by the borders of Egypt filled with crocodiles. It's crossed by a bridge. At its edge stand the priests and the nobles to welcome their victorious king with bouquet of flowers. Finally, he presents the arched sword to Amun while crushing his enemies. Other reliefs represent him fighting the Libyans and catching their old leader who wears 1 feather and ready to smite him with his spear. The important scene of his war with the Hittites comes below, where he stands in his chariot blowing them and driving captives in front of him. It's the oldest representation of these tough enemies. Ramesses II is on the other side of the outer wall, where he describes his battles against the Hittites, then records the famous peace treaty which he had signed with their king Hattusili in the 21st year of his own reign. The poetic description of Kadesh war is known by Pentaur, who wrote the poem. Ramesses represents his captives to god Ammon, but his reliefs can't be compared with the great ones of his father, King Seti I. The third pylon in Karnak temple was built by King Amun-Hotep III, who ordered the destruction of all the buildings of his predecessors and reused their blocks in the fillings of his pylon. Chevrier found these blocks and rearranged them to find buried monuments, the most important of which are the complete chapel of King Xisutris, the alabaster stones of King Amun-Hotep I's chapel, and the stones of the chapel of Queen Hatshepsut, consecrated for the rest of the sacred bark of Ammon. That chapel is known as La Chapelle Rouge, or the Red Chapel. These chapels are constructed now in an open court, reached through the north entrance of the Grand Open Court in Karnak. It's called the Open Museum. The chapel of King Xisutris I was built of fine white limestone over a relatively high base. It's composed of a hall with two entrances on one axis, each with an ascending aisle, amidst steps ending by a rounded top railing. In each facade there are 4 pillars divided by the entrance, which door sill is decorated with a winged sun, and the Egyptian cornice which surrounds the upper part of the chapel. In the middle of the chapel is a giant base surrounded by 4 columns, most probably for the sacred bark of Ammon. But W.S. Smith thinks that there used to be a throne instead of the granite base during the reign of King Xisutris I, where he sat to celebrate the Jubilee Festival or the Hapsed. The scenes and texts on the walls express the perfection of art which the artist has reached in that period. They represent the king in his relationships with gods, but the most important of which are the ones which state the nomes or governorates of Egypt and their relation with the Hapsed festival celebrated by King Xisutris I. The open court in Karnak comprises several chapels and constructions that were found as fillings inside the third pylon of King Amun-Hotep III. That happened in 1936 when Chevrier was trying to examine that pylon. One of the important chapels is the Red Chapel of Queen Hatshepsut. It's built of fine red granite brought all the way from Aswan. It's entered through a door in the middle of the entrance, marked with black granite. The most important events in the life of this unique queen are inscribed on the inner walls of her chapel, like the dedication of her 2 obelisks to god Ammon, being her father. The queen took the throne from Prince Thutmose III, who wasn't her son, since he was still a minor of 10 years old when his father, King Thutmose II, and her husband at the same time, died quite early. They had co-regency for 6 years, after which she ruled alone. So he shared her some ceremonies and official celebrations in which dancers were present and offerings were sacrificed in front of the sacred bark of Ammon. The priests carry the bark on their shoulders, marching in what's supposed to be the Opet festival. The fine reliefs are very clear and elaborated, some of which tell the nomes of Egypt, represented in the form of God Habi, the Nile god, above whom the name of each of the 42 nomes is written. Queen Hatshepsut was the most powerful queen ever. She ruled the country alone for 20 years, defying the traditions and conventions, not only of her own country, but also of the ancient world, and eventually proved that she was worthy of the title of the Queen of Egypt. The wide open court in the center of Karnak is the original core of the temple. That's where the kings of the Middle Kingdom, 2000 years BC, constructed their monuments. Unfortunately, its stones were dismantled by their successors, who reused them in building their own constructions here. At the end of the court lies the Hall of the Festivals, which was built by King Thutmose III in the 25th year of his reign after the death of Queen Hatshepsut. Here, he celebrated his first jubilee, or the Hebset festival, and he called it the Akhminu, which means the lighted monument or the minaret. It's composed of three main parts. The first are the side chambers, which acquire the necessity of the temple's services of food, drinks, essences, dresses, and accessories. The second part is a hall of columns. The third part has rooms in the east, intermediated by a sanctuary that's annexed with a botanical garden decorated by scenes of birds and animals brought by Thutmose III from Syria to the garden of the temple. So he is considered the first constructor of a zoo in the world. The Karnak list of 61 kings' names was found in a small chamber here and was taken to the Louvre Museum by Priest d'Avignon in 1844. It is thought that the design of the hall represents the early stage of the Basilican style, which was so popular during the Ramesside period and later found its way out to Europe. The sacred lake is in the eastern part of the temple. It was used for purification of the priests serving here, and of the king and the high priest, who were the only one allowed to the sanctuary. The lake is 4 meters deep and is connected to the Nile by tunnels under the ground. The golden statues of god Ammon and his family were also purified by the sacred water of the Nile, the eternal river, which was a cause of the mighty civilization of Egypt.